This isn't Eurovision. It's that time of year again. The Mercury Prize 2023 ceremony is days away, and I need to talk about this shortlist. In a world of award ceremonies designed to gatekeep what good music is, the Mercury Prize is kind of refreshing. It's a celebration of music from around the UK and Ireland, but mostly London, of all genres. There's only one award, so the rest of the ceremony is basically nothing but fantastic live performances. I first started paying attention to the award in 2020 when everyone had a lot more time to listen to albums, and the award was a great sample platter of what that year had to offer. But like many sample platters in the past, I've picked and chosen what I've decided to go for instead of full stuff in my face at the buffet table. That changes right now. I am going to listen to all 12 albums nominated for this year's Mercury Prize and give some sort of thoughts on them. I cannot guarantee that I'm going to have a lot to say about every album, and I am also not Michael T. Snerophone or Melon. I don't know shit. Yeah, if you're looking for deep musical review and criticism, this probably isn't a video for you, but I'm going to try. God, am I going to try. This is just me talking about music I've listened to and, for the most part, really enjoyed. Without any further ado, here is 10 reasons why you should listen to Olivia Dean-Spacey. I mean, the Mercury Prize. So the Mercury Prize noms. We're going alphabetically here, which means we're starting with the most contentious entry on the list, Arctic Monkeys' The Car. A lot of people had a problem with this album's inclusion. Oh, the band's past the prime. They're taking up space that could have been given to newer artists. Hey, this isn't nearly as good as their older stuff. Like, did you see the response to their Glasgow set? The band seems well aware of their recent reputation, though, with much of this album touching on disillusion, and meeting constantly high expectations. It's strangely meta at times. Well, that really just leaves us with one question.
What do you think about The Car? Do you like it?
Well, I think I do. I'll be honest, first time I listened to this one, I couldn't get through it. I think it was Alex Turner's voice. Am I going to get put on a list for saying that? Okay, it's 3 a.m. I don't want to be too loud, but just make it clear, I didn't know he had laryngitis. Just bear that in mind as you watch the rest of the segment. I'm sorry. I'll get back to the video. Like, ain't this the guy that produced those aggressive laddish yelps on "About that you look good on the dance floor"? His approach felt somewhat unnatural and just kind of whiny to me. Sadly, as each song passed on my first listen, it only grew more grating. That said, after taking some time off and coming back to give The Car a second test drive, I think I've done a U-turn on this one. For starters, Alex's voice really grew on me. Maybe knowing what I was getting myself into from the outset helped, but I think the guy does put in a good performance. Again, especially considering the circumstances. That said, it is what surrounds his voice that sells me on this record. I can only really describe it as gorgeous. Starting with a base of lounge pop and topping it with layers of jazz, soul, dark electronica and a full bloody orchestra, each song on The Car is a gorgeous sonic landscape. Add the aforementioned metatextual lyrics and yeah, I think I like this one. I do feel like with how meta this album can be, I'm missing out on a lot of the context having not listened to the previous Arctic Monkey albums. So maybe in a few months when I've had time to listen to those, I might like this more. I might also hate it, who knows, let's see. At this point, it feels like tradition for the Mercury Prize to feature an album from the UK's explosive jazz scene each year, and this year's entry is an absolute stormer. When meeting with an old school friend last month, we went through the shortlist together, and I was surprised to hear that this is the band that she recognised the most. I think it's safe to say she's got pretty damn good taste. Coming from London-based quintet, the Ezra Collective, Where I'm Meant to Be is a bright, fiery party record, and it boasts quite a guest list. There's collabs with Sampa the Great, Koji Radical, Emily Sunday, and now Tracks like Victory Dance glisten with bossa nova and Latin influences. I also really enjoy Smile and its free-flowing piano solo, which is eventually joined by the two best instruments, the triangle and the cowbell. There's a lot to enjoy with this one, but while I really loved my time with it, I am more than aware that over an hour of mostly instrumental tracks ain't gonna be for everyone. But if you have even the slightest interest in jazz, it's more than a worthwhile listen. The band themselves probably say it better than I ever could.
Yeah, we're just trying to bring joy, we're trying to bring good vibes, happiness, all through the medium of swinging music, you know what I'm saying?
I say mission accomplished. The world of dance music ain't one that I'm particularly familiar with. Of course there are dance tracks I've listened to and loved, but as someone with pretty bad crowd anxiety who also gets sensory overload really easily, a club is basically my idea of hell. I came into this one with very few expectations. Still, thankfully the tracks on Fred Again's latest, Actual Life 3, January the 1st to September the 9th, 2022, are intimate enough to work just as well listening alone as they do on a sweat-lined dance floor. Intimacy is the word of the day here, as Fred Again rounds out what he describes as a very personal trilogy that started as a way to chronicle and process life in lockdown. Many of these tracks were created while out in the world, on the tube or at airport terminals, and you can feel Fred soaking the world around him as he creates his tracks. The tracks on here often feel like slow-mo captures of fleeting moments, from the euphoric to the melancholic, and each is named after the sampled artist or inspiration of the song. Delilah (Pull Me Out of This) samples Delilah Montague's Lost Keys, a dreamy yet despondent ballad about being anxious and alone at the club, given an ironic club remix on here. That track then blends freely into the next, Cammy (Like I Do), which continues its theme of love beyond two people, isolating them from the rest of the world. Delilah's main hook is also one of a few that then bleed into later tracks of the album, turning it into a continuous, mildly disorienting space in which the music thrives. The inherent repetitive nature of the genre might still not suit my dumb brain that needs 7 switch ups and the keys changed to feel alive, but this is still an enjoyable listen. Like dance music, grime and drill are more genres I don't know much about. My little sister's always been a fan, so I've been exposed to it a fair bit, but nothing turns someone away from enjoying a thing quicker than their sibling liking it. Thankfully, it's now been a few years since my sister learned how to use earphones, and in that time, my music taste has changed quite a lot. So maybe it's time I give this side of my home city's music scene another chance. Leading me into this world is Beautiful and Brutal Yard by J Hus. J Hus is an artist known for his tongue-in-cheek lyrics and eclectic style fusing Afrobeat, grime, drill, R&B, hip-hop and trap, being one of the pioneers of a genre known as Afro Swing. For Bebe, he's also put together a list of featured artists ranging from other members of the UK rap scene to Georgia Smith, Drake, and even the talking pizza size from that one Gorillaz video. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Drake's feature, Who Told Ya? This track's getting a lot of attention and I think it's more than warranted. J Hus delivers line about fat pum-pums and long Johnsons with great flow over a smooth Afrobeat. And yeah, the main hook's really fun. I'd never think for a second that this bad man don't dance. Drake's alright. His slower approach helps give this song a nice ebb and flow, but I don't know, I keep getting distracted by how he seems to go off beat constantly. Like, was he listening to another track entirely? The first half of the album has some other great tracks I really got into. Militarians features Nigerian artist Naira Marley and sees the two embrace their African heritage and shout out their fan bases. Some great guitar and horn licks on that one, love it. Obviously loved the Georgia Smith feature too. That girl could sing her shopping list and I would be so vibing with it. The deeper we get into J Hus's world, however, the more I'm scrambling to find the emergency exit. This is mainly a me problem. Masculine is a fun track, but on that track, host states, "Man, masculine." Me? I ain't masculine. I'm the opposite of masculine. This album dragged me kicking and screaming into a world that I was not prepared to head into. I have learned more slang terms for gun than I ever expected to. Don't get me wrong. I understand that what Jay says and does isn't to be taken seriously a lot of the time, and he builds a world that is worth immersing yourself in with fantastic production throughout, especially when the Afro swing sound comes out in full. I just don't think the aggressive grime and drill elements to Jay sounds are ones I still really enjoy. And I didn't find enough elsewhere on the album to want to sit through a whole album of it, I'm sorry. Look, sometimes an album or sound just doesn't click with you, and that's okay. Please let it be okay. Please, I'm sorry, I'm terrified of Jay Huss's fans. So like I said before, 2020 was the year I got into albums. Part of that was down to Mercury Prize, but most of it was down to Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure? The first album I loved enough to buy on vinyl. It's an intimate, sensual affair with a throwback retro sound that has all the modern production scene that you'd expect from a 2020 record. It's fun, sexy, and oh so replayable. And the intimate disco vibe captured people's needs for escapism during the of 2020. So of course it was a shoe-in for that year's Mercury Prize shortlist. It wasn't on there. Perhaps looking to rectify that glaring omission, the prize saw fit to include Ware's follow-up album, That Feels Good, on this year's shortlist. Now, Jessie's an artist that has been around the block for over a decade, but with the exception of the Britain's Got Talent montage fodder from her first album, she never quite got the flowers she deserved. This, of course, changed when she settled into the sensual disco groove of What's Your Pleasure. So, unsurprisingly, this record follows that album's path pretty closely, albeit with quite a different tone. To see the differences between them, you just gotta take a look at the openers of both albums. What's Your Pleasure kicks off on a high with Spotlight. Immediately you're thrown into that gorgeous bed of strings as Jessie's sultry vocals kicks in. Then, it happens. The production dives headfirst into that deep driving disco beat, and right then and there, the album's main thesis is clear as hell. That Feels Good opens like this.
That feels good. That feels good.
This is still sexy disco, but this time there's a lot more bondage gear involved. Much of That Feels Good seems to follow on from the more upbeat, funky tracks of What's Your Pleasure, like Ooh La La or Soul Control. As a fan of the more atmospheric, string-heavy tracks on the last album, I was a little disappointed on my first listen, but boy did I come around to this one. This album is just pure fun, with tracks like Freak Me Now providing a pure shot of adrenaline, especially when co-writer Clarence Coffey Jr. jumps in on vocals like a deranged drill instructor. And then there's Pearls with its sing-along hooks which feels scientifically engineered to get stuck in your brain in the best way possible. Begin Again is another highlight, the vocal layering, the soaring horn section, that jazzy piano bit, it's all superb. I can imagine this playing at the train party from the end of the Spotlight music video. Then there's the solo tracks like Hello Love, which is when the record starts to lose me a little. Unlike the luscious, expansive production found on What's Your Pleasure, the slower stuff on here just doesn't have anywhere to go and just serves to hold up the party. It's not a major issue, but it is interesting to see how Jessie's music has evolved over the last few albums. The slower, sultry pop ballads on records like The Overlooked Glass House used to solely define her wheelhouse, but now represents the lower points in her album. Not gonna lie, I might still prefer Glass House, don't get me wrong. That Feels Good is another stellar album from Ware, but one of the music videos on Glass House has this one shot of it which my friends meme the hell out of. Yeah, they're not beating that, I'm sorry. Georgia Ellery is no stranger to the Mercury Prize, being nominated for the first time back in 2021 as part of Black Country New Road. This new project from her is very different, combining her whispery vocals and string playing abilities with aggressive production by Tyler Sky. My first exposure to this dynamic duo was with Concrete Over Water, both enthralling and infinitely confusing upon first listen, and this album is similar. I Love You, Jennifer B is a stellar confession of love to the San Milanese rap icon Jenny B. What you get is what you see. What we have here is art pop at its most avant-garde. The stories on here, while personal, are grand and theatric, while the production constantly feels it could unravel at any moment. The duo throw everything at this thing. Guitars, violins, harpsichord, glitchy electronica, shouting vowels, whatever this sound is. Jockstrap takes pride in Kate Bushing harder than Kate Bush had ever Kate Bushed before, while also paying tribute to other pop icons like Madonna on Greatest Hits. Said track also lifts its piano riffs from Fatboy Slim's Praise You to great effect. What's It All About is a sweet nostalgic little number, focused on platonic relationship between two girls who clearly hold romantic feelings for each other. The wistful romantic vibe continues on the aforementioned showpiece of the album, Concrete Over Water, which sparkles with grandeur as Georgia sings of the time spent with a loved one, though seemingly split between two lovers. The rest of the album is full of wonderful contrasts. Angst combines some of the more delicate production on the album, with lyrics about having a panic attack while listening to the Wise Blood album Titanic Rising. Deborah starts with a solemn passage about the nature of grief, before jumping into a party jam with multiple references to Animal Crossing. The whole thing is dense with references and metaphors, and this album did take a few listens to really make sense of it all. But once I was fully able to embrace its sound, I knew I love you, Jennifer B. The Mercury Prize is known for being two things: incredibly eclectic and painfully London-centric. Here to keep up one tradition while breaking another is the Dublin-based contemporary Irish folk group Lankum, with the album False Lankum. This here is no compact pop romp. Every single song on this beast, except one shorter track and 3 intermissions, is at least 5 minutes long, with the closing track coming to just under 13. This album is a haunting melancholy sprawl, from the chilling a cappella intro of the opening funeral dirge, I Dig My Grave, to the dreamy ambience of Clear Away in the Morning, and so much more. There's a surprising amount of variety to this one, even within the individual tracks. Take my personal highlight of the album, The New York Trader. What starts as a simple jaunty sea shanty slowly morphs into something far darker as the tale goes off the rails and the instruments shift from merry fiddling and strumming to the sort of ominous drumming and harsh distorted strings you'd expect from the soundtrack of Salmon Run in Splatoon. This is another hearty recommendation, though bear in mind that this is an album that refuses to meet the listener halfway. This ain't Irish folk made more accessible and mainstream, it's an album that's over an hour long and starts with a funeral dirge. This is one to take in slowly, sit with, embrace and fully immerse yourself in. An experience in the purest definition of the word. Loyal Kana is, as far as I'm aware, the only member of the UK rap scene gutsy enough to name a song after a celebrity chef, which in my eyes makes him one of the greats. Said song, Ottolenghi, was my introduction to him a few years ago. Contemplative lines about interactions he's had on the train over a dreamy piano-laced beat and mind-bending music video. Hugo takes those elements in a darker, more direct and personal direction, with Kana even apologising to Ottolenghi's pianist for being so blunt. Much of the record explores Kana's experiences as a mixed-race person, and how the birth of his first son and the anxieties of parenting has helped him reconcile with his own father. The storytelling on this album is rich, with Kana recalling his childhood surrounded by violence and death, and the apathetic response from society at large over topics such as gang violence. Meanwhile, the signature production style of Kana's past work is here intact, with producer Quez weaving wonderful jazz flourishes with Kana's stream of consciousness-like flow, but Hugo ups the ante even further, with tracks like Open a Hate introducing way more aggressive percussion, and there's one section towards the album's climax where Laurel's voice becomes heavily compressed and distorted as his stresses and anxieties build. All these parts combine to produce one absolutely stunning album. To be honest, if I were to bet on any of these albums taking the prize, it would probably be this one. This is the type of record you only get from an artist genuinely able to not just speak their mind and bare their soul, but do it with flair, finesse, and a heavy dose of self-consciousness. One extra thing, the album also makes use of a few guest vocalists. They don't take the spotlight here, but they add extra texture and layers to the tracks. It's a welcome addition, but what's really interesting to me is that one of the featured artists on here just so happens to be Okay, yes, this entire video is just a thinly veiled excuse to gush about this artist and this album, but I'll try not to spend too much time on it. Anyway, the year 2020 is featured a lot in this video, and it's for good reason, as it was pivotal in not just forming my music taste, but really allowed me to explore my identity in a way that I hadn't before. By the end of it, you could say that maybe I weren't the same, and trying to constantly explain that to my family and the people around me was the hardest part of the year. What I'm trying to say is that Olivia Dean wrote an accidental queer anthem. What a cathartic discovery. I spent the rest of that summer diving headfirst into her discography at the time. It, to be fair, didn't take long. She only had like a 4-song EP and like 3 other tracks at that point. That said, when she had released was so rich with earnest and playful lyrics and a sound that perfectly balanced indie pop with neo soul, that I just fell in love. With all that in mind, I am so pleased to report that her debut album Messy did not disappoint. After her third EP, Growth, took a slower, more laid-back approach, this debut sees Dean bring the bops, especially on tracks like Dive and Ladies Room. And while this is mostly a return to the neo-soul that I've loved of her in the past, this album also flirts with a range of other genres. There's electronic flourishes and layers on strings on tracks like No Man, and the whole thing kicks off with UFO and its layers of vocoder over folksy guitar strumming. I enjoy it, and I'm ecstatic to see Dean experiment with her sound, but it's a curious opener for an album that otherwise lets Olivia's vocals shine uncompressed. Said vocals are stunning, of course, both youthful and rich with old soul gravitas. She gives these songs both weight and levity in a single note.
I would not be standing here today without my granny. She came to this country when she was 18, never been on a plane before. And I was just thinking about when I was writing this album, I could have never made that decision when I was 18 and been so brave, and I adore her, and as I said, this song is her legacy, and just a love letter to that whole generation of people, what they did for this country.
The highlight of this album comes right at the end with Carmen, a stunning tribute to Dean's grandmother who came from Guyana to the UK as part of the Windrush generation. It's an emotional and triumphant march that genuinely brings a tear to my eye every time I listen to it. God, I love this album. God, I love this singer. I saw absolutely no one line this up as a potential nominee prior to the shortlist getting announced, but I am so glad it made the list. If anything, just so I'm not driving myself mad by being the only person obsessed with this girl. How well do I know Bray? Well, my first meeting with her was through her Jolene for Millennials Bop, Natalie Doe. I enjoyed it. The lyrics and music were both really witty and enjoyable, but I don't think it fully grabbed me musically. Her reintroduction to the world with escapism was way more down my street, but I had yet to feel like she was directly talking to me.
Hello, it's Ray here.
Oh, this album's off to a great start. So it's fairly well known at this point that this album's been a long time coming, with Ray splitting from her label in 2021, citing frustrations with the control over her music and an absolute refusal to let her release any sort of album for years. The result is My 21st Century Blues, which really does feel like a release of all the anger and frustration built up over the years. This is Ray's story, no compromise, with each song on the record representing a chapter of her life. From leaving manipulative relationships, including the one with her record label, to experiences with abuse, eating disorders, and drug addictions. This album chronicles some of the darkest moments of her life. It is an incredibly cathartic and deeply personal listen, often to an uncomfortable degree. That said, the album is lined with an air of resilience and healing, from the literal lyrics about bouncing back to how you can almost feel Ray processing events in real time as she writes each track. I will say though, the album's thematic throughline does get a little tangled towards the end, with Ray's blues getting so general on environmental anxiety that it veers straight into a genre I refer to as... The music itself blends elements of rhythm and 21st century blues with twisted electronica, with the sneering percussion on escapism being a real highlight. Ray's delivery carries the same dichotomy, with sniking and biting while still as vulnerable as the subject matter would suggest. Her lyricism has fantastic flow to it, and the moments where Ray slows down for some proper crooning allows her vocals to really shine. Overall, it's a fantastic reintroduction to the newly independent artist. An album that is the product of its circumstances to the same degree as this one is often tough to follow up, but what I've heard on here has left me excited to see what Ray does next. Nymph is an album chronicling Shy Girl's feelings of vulnerability, named after an elusive and alluring figure from Greek mythology. The opening track, Whoa, explores the pressures of existing in the public eye. It also contains lyrics about a delicious booty. Take that, Chanel, you might have the booty hypnotic, but does yours have a Michelin star? Don't get it twisted, this album can go to gloriously filthy places sometimes, but it does so with a delicate touch, using said places as a starting point to explore themes of human connection and self-reflection. Just as her lyrics are often reduced to their filthiness, Shy Girl herself is labelled as a rapper on Google, and while she does bring some killer bars, her versatility as an artist goes far beyond that. The standout sound on this album comes from a distinctive, experimental, deconstructed club pop sound. Part of that comes from the hyperpop scene, in which co-producer Sega Bodega is a big name, but Nymph sets its sights further. Tracks like Firefly bring to mind the era of early noughties pop and garage, where artists were taking R&B inspired pop of the mid to late 90s and getting freaky with the production. It sounds like they recorded the demo, took a massive pair of scissors to it and did unspeakable things. I was a small child during this era of music, so of course I love it. That's not to say that Shy Girl's production style is backwards facing or aggressive, as it's anything but. Take Poison, which assaults the listener with its aggressive bass line pulsating underneath Europoppy accordion riffs and Shy Guy going hard on a South London accent. As a Euro fan who grew up not far from Shy Girl's native Blackheath, this one ticks all the boxes for me. Tracks like Honey and Wildfire take the club sound in a dreamier, more atmospheric direction that I also adore. Throughout the album, a range of unexpected samples pop up, from the sound of a horse galloping to Bunny's a Rider by Caroline Polachek. They all come together to create a fabulously chaotic soundscape, and like many a folklore creature, Nymph is alluring, enigmatic, and ever shape-shifting. Half the fun of this album is not quite knowing what direction it's heading in next, and in that regard I probably said too much about this one. Go give it a listen. We started the list with a past prize winner, and we now end it with another, as Edinburgh-based Young Fathers return from the shops with Heavy Heavy. As the title would suggest, this one delves deep into the human psyche, with many tracks taking a cynical and somewhat nihilistic point of view. But it's not all been a little heavy lately. Those feelings get quickly overridden by a sense of resilience and willingness to uncover joy within the pain. Take I Saw, which moves from a moody tirade on Brexit and the legacy of colonialism and the effectiveness of turning a blind eye, to what the band describes as an anthemic call to arms. Other tracks like Drum and Tell Somebody are downright jubilant and soul-lifting, and the album carries an overpowering sense of energy throughout. While the production of most of these albums has been eclectic throughout, Heavy Sound is so alive and visceral, so dynamic in how it shifts and changes, that each song feels like a living organism unto itself. One of my favourite moments comes right at the end of the album, as vocalist Chaos repeats the same line over and over in different accents, representing different elements of his upbringing, from Washington DC, to the south side of Edinburgh, to Lagos in Nigeria. This final track transitions so smoothly back to the first track on the album that I would definitely recommend listening to this one on repeat a few times to really immerse yourself into it. So there we have it, 12 albums, I wouldn't say reviewed, covered? 12 albums covered. Off the list, I think my favourite albums were obviously Messy, and then Nymph, Hugo, and then either Where I'm Meant to Be or I Love You Jennifer B. Of those, I think Shy Girl and Jockstrap surprised me the most. Not to say I wasn't expecting to enjoy them or anything, but they grabbed me to an extent that I wasn't really expecting. Firefly on Nymph especially, that song goes so hard. That said, I enjoyed all of these albums to at least some degree, even the ones of styles that I'm not usually a massive fan of. This is a well-selected batch of albums, each with their own merits and each worth checking out yourself. Though I am probably going to join the line of people complaining that Our Backs Were a Bridge for You to Cross didn't make the list. I think the Mercury Prize is such a good starting point for exploring new music and expanding your horizons, and I recommend doing this, even if trying to put my thoughts into this video has literally taken a year of my lifespan.